So thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Yolanda. I'm a Community Engagement Officer for Cumbria Wildlife Trust, and I work for a programme called The Bay, A Blueprint for Recovery. And this is a programme that aims to connect people to each other and their communities by getting people involved in nature's recovery. We've also got Simon Hill from the University of Nottingham. And Sally is helping with the talk by admitting the latecomers and sorting out the questions. Just a few housekeeping rules. If you could be on mute unless you're asking a question, that would be great, just so we're not getting background noise. The talk is also being recorded, and depending on how well it goes, we might put it on YouTube. So if you don't want to be recorded and don't want to be on YouTube, if you just stop your video, but you'll still obviously be able to listen to the talk. So Simon's going to talk for about half an hour on the history of whaling in the Northwest. And I'm then going to talk for about half an hour on some of the similarities between whales and humans, and also whale conservation. And then we'll have about 10 minutes at the end for questions. So I'll share my screen. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Okay, and over to you, Simon.
Well, thanks for that, Yolanda. And, it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So as Yolanda said, the first disclosure is that I am not a marine biologist. My background is in history, but of course, whaling has a history as well. So I'm going to be concentrating on the historical content, as it were, and then that will lead into what Yolanda is going to be talking about with conservation. Okay, so my first slide then. I'm going to start off, with a very basic question. What is a whale? So obviously you can see a mother and her calf here. I presume these are right whales. I don't know if they're northern or southern right whales, but that's certainly what I think they are. And to begin with, what are whales? Well, in the short, one sentence answers that whales are marine mammals, and they have some some obvious features that you would associate with marine mammals. So they breathe air, as you can see here on the picture. They both come up to the surface. There is parental care, which we often associate with mammals. And again, this photograph here proves that. They're also warm-blooded, and they're also predatory animals as well. That's not something we always think of when we, what we associate with whales, but they certainly are predatory animals in their own right. So certain whales that have teeth, like, cetaceans more broadly. Cetaceans include whales, dolphins, and porpoises. Some of them have teeth, like killer whales, the orca, and of course they can prey on other whales. Other whales, some of the larger ones, many of the larger ones, they don't actually have teeth. They have baleen, and of course, using the baleen in their mouths, they extract plankton. So that is a form of predation as well. So a whale is essentially a marine mammal. Now, in some ways, I mean that sounds nice and neat, doesn't it? A whale is a marine mammal, but in many ways they are rather anomalous creatures. So as you can see, in this photograph, they're moving freely in water. That makes sense. But so far as we're aware, whales don't tend to get dizzy, or they don't tend to get the bends either. I mean, I'm sure we've all seen footage of whales when they jump out of the water, they go smashing down back into the water. If kids were to do that in a swimming pool, human children or adults, you're likely to get dizzy. But whales apparently don't get that. And certainly when humans come up too quickly from deeper water into shallower waters, they will come down with the bends. But as far as we can work out, whales don't have that problem. So they are well adapted to their environments. But as I say, these are some anomalies. They are somewhat different. They have, raised more questions than answers, you might say, in the marine biological community. And part of the reason for this, why they are quite anomalous, is their mysterious evolutionary origins. So when you look at these whales here in the picture, you would think that their ancient ancestors were, they began along the evolutionary tree, if that's, what you believe. You would assume that they came from, some sort of marine animal. But this is where the story gets rather interesting. Scientists have, paleontologists, marine biologists, they've tried to work out, for centuries even, where whales come from on the evolutionary tree. And gradually over the centuries, over the decades, answers did prove forthcoming. But a major breakthrough was made in the 1970s when these American paleontologists were digging in Pakistan, and they came across this skeleton, and it was, it looked like a land animal. But when they looked more closely at the ears, when they looked more closely at the skull, they saw these, very thick ear bones. And of course, that was something that, they knew immediately what that was. That was a product, a characteristic that we associate with whales. So the fact that there was a land animal with whale-like ear bones suggested a very strong link between, whales and terrestrial origins, not from the marine environment. And anyway, further research indicated that whales were, descended from these extinct arctodactyls. In other words, animals with hooves. So that could include, horses, giraffes, and other creatures like that. So that is where we believe that's what the fossil record points towards. That these were animals with a terrestrial origin. And as I say, they date back, in deeper geological time. Obviously, not deep. Pardon the pun. In terms of the great length of the planet, whales are relatively new kids on the block. We're even more recent. But they date from the Eocene about 53 million years ago. And the process of them moving from land into the sea, it was not a steady, smooth process. There were peaks, there were troughs, according to the fossil record. But gradually they did become fully aquatic. Now, we could go greater length, and I'm sure Yolanda knows a lot more about this than I do, but we could talk about the different taxonomic hierarchies and categories for whales. I'm just going to say, for the moment, there are three broad groups. So you have the Archaeocetes. They are the whales from, the Eocene and back in time. They look nothing like a whale today. They looked a bit wolf-like, you might say. But today we have the Mysticeti. These are the baleen whales. And of course, the whales that you see on this photograph, they are examples of the Mysticeti, and they are very large, obviously. Conversely, we have the Odontoceti. These can be smaller compared to the baleen whales. I should have said a few moments ago, the Mysticeti, they have the baleen in their mouths, like this right whale, to filter the plankton. In contrast, the Odontoceti, they're toothed. Okay, so we could be talking sperm whales here. If we look more broadly at cetaceans, to include dolphins and porpoises, obviously they have teeth as well. And of course, the Odontoceti have developed echolocation, to hunt their prey. Mysticeti don't really have that characteristic. If you want to know more about the paleontology of whales, I really do recommend this book, Cetacean Paleobiology, written by esteemed paleontologists. I'm a lecturer by trade, so we always encourage our students to read around the topic. If you want to do that for this, this is a very good book to look at. Okay, I've touched on some of the biological properties there. Yolanda will go on about that later on in much greater detail. But so we know now what whales are. Let's say a little bit then about how they interact with people. Okay, next point, please, Yolanda. Just a little, hey, there we go, there we go. Right, so, Yolanda and I were talking about this not so long ago. Whales certainly fascinate people. They fascinate humans. And I think, Yolanda, you said you think it's due to the intelligence and the similarities between whales and humans. I think it also has a lot to do with their size as well. Many of, not all whales are, as massive as a blue whale, obviously, but they are certainly a lot larger than humans. I think people, when they see a whale breaching, it's something that really takes your breath away. And of course, this human fascination with whales has percolated into human culture. So Moby Dick, obviously a very famous novel from the 19th century. It's all about Captain Ahab hunting his whale and perishing in the process. And of course, we also have music as well. Some of you may remember back in the early 1970s, there was an LP released by Payne. And of course, it was about he was a marine biologist. And of course, it was recordings of the songs of humpback whales. And this helped to bring, Greenpeace's Save the Whale campaign of that decade. It really brought whales a lot closer to home, literally, into your living room on your LP player. So that's very, positive, whales appearing in human literature and music. But unfortunately, there is another side to this, which I'll be talking about now. And that is whaling, obviously capturing whales and using them for their natural resources. I could talk about this in much greater length and detail. It is a global activity, has been historically speaking. Different countries have engaged in whaling: Britain, the United States, and of course, when it existed, the Soviet Union, of course, Japan as well. It's a global phenomenon. But today we're going to be concentrating primarily on ports in the northwest of England. But before I say more on that, I just want to give you a crude breakdown, if you like, of the geography of this. My specialism, you might say, is British history from the 18th century onwards, transatlantic history with America as well. In the 18th century, as far as the British were concerned, there were two broad whaling trades. So there was the first one, the northern whaling industry, and that was concentrated around the Arctic, the Davis Straits, Greenland, the Denmark Strait, and places such as that. And of course, the quarry there probably would have been right whales. Interestingly enough, back then, whales were referred to as whales in contemporary literature, but they were also referred to as fish as well. Obviously, they weren't too particular about the scientific categorization at that time. Conversely, we also have the southern whaling fishery as well, and Britain engaged in that. That was more to do with the Southern Ocean. So that could be obviously southern polar regions, the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and also the Pacific as well. So there's two distinct whaling trades, whaling industries here. Now, in terms of our ports in the northwest, obviously, there's an obvious candidate for whaling going up by Cumbria, and of course that is the port of Whitehaven. Now, I must confess I've never actually been there, but I have read this article, which you can see here in Northern History, and again, I suggest you have a look at it. It's very interesting. Whitehaven in the 18th century did engage in the whaling industry, but it was more, it's fits and starts. It wasn't consistent, it wasn't annual. And of course, the author of this presentation article argues that whaling was a bit of a, side industry, as it were, when other parts of the port's portfolio were going down. People would become involved in whaling to try and substitute, some of their business interests. A possible reason why Whitehaven never became a mass whaling port, as it were, is, as I understand it, the hinterland is not as big as, say, Liverpool was. And Liverpool's the other case study that we're going to be talking about now. Okay, so obviously I'm going to be talking a bit about Liverpool and its whaling trade since the 18th century. And what we have here then is as far as I'm aware, it's the only known picture of a Liverpool whaling ship. This is from the very end of the 18th century, probably more the very early years of the 19th century. This is the James, a whaling ship. It was originally French, I think, but obviously there's a lot of wars during the late 18th and the early 19th century. And of course, it got retrofitted and sent up to the Arctic. And this picture is available at National Museums, Liverpool. They have that there. So what would happen is the whaling ship, as you see here, would sail into the Arctic. This is the 18th century. This is before, the catapulted, harpoon gun, mounted at the front of the ship. That wasn't the case at this time. What would happen is that the larger ship would sail to the Arctic, and then, of course, if you see Moby Dick, they lower away the smaller boats. They start going up to their quarry and doing what they do. But if you look closely at the picture, and if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see men on icebergs as well. They're also going after the seals. So the whaling trade for Liverpool is a bit more broader. It's not just about hunting whales. And as you could see, it could be done in tandem with ships from other ports as well. Okay, so some stats. Okay, Liverpool started as a whaling port in 1750. And as you can see, only one vessel left. But by 1776, the picture had, the landscape had changed completely. We've gone from one vessel to 20 vessels in those years going out whaling. That is quite a significant turnaround, as it were. So why is this? I suppose this is one area where historians and scientists have something in common. We always have questions. We always try and establish patterns. And of course, why is there this growth here in Liverpool's whaling trade? And part of the reason for that is that there is investment to be had. So some of the big maritime mercantile families in Liverpool during this era, the Tarletons and so forth, they do invest money in whaling. Okay, obviously the ship has got to be retrofitted, it's got to be fitted out, you've got to pay the men, so on and so forth. There were businesses willing to do this at the time. The reason why they were willing to invest in whaling is because of regional industrialization. Obviously, the Northwest region is sometimes referred to as the first industrial region in England. And of course, the whale oil, well, the whale oil was quite useful here. What was happening is that obviously, the ships would go to the Arctic, then they would come back with blubber, whale fat, essentially. And what would happen is they would boil this down in the port of Liverpool, Apparently, it's very pungent to smell, as you can imagine, but the whale oil that was produced from boiling down the blubber, that could be used to lubricate machinery. And of course, this is, the start of the Industrial Revolution. So there is a market for it. Another reason why Liverpool's whaling industry takes off is because of the whaling bounty. I'll say more about that in due course, but suffice to say, Liverpool's MPs at the time were very supportive of the whaling industry. Liverpool was a big maritime centre, as I'm sure you're aware. The MPs want to support that. Another reason why it prospers at Liverpool at this time is because there are a few regional rivals. As I said, Whitehaven does dabble with whaling, but never really takes off. By the 18th century, Chester is also, the River Dee has silted up, so Chester's not really a major competitor here. And then, of course, we have the little matter of the American Revolution. No coincidence, folks, that in 1776, the year that America declares independence from Britain, there were 20 whaling vessels departing Liverpool. Prior to the American Revolution, what would happen is that Britain would import a lot of its whale oil from the American colonies, bearing in mind they were not the United States, not yet. But when the colonies rebel, they become rebels in the eyes of the British. What happens then is that Britain retaliates economically. Imports from America are very much curtailed. The whale oil still needs to be purchased. And as a result, it's over to the British, as it were, to purchase and to find the whale oil for themselves. I believe all this is rather significant. When we think of Liverpool as a port, we tend to think of perhaps transatlantic slavery, the White Star Line, Titanic, the Blue Funnel Line sailing off to China. We don't tend to think of Liverpool as being a major whaling port. But if you look at the statistics, the parliamentary papers from this era, Liverpool was actually the second whaling port in England, London being the first. By this, I mean the most, that had the largest scale whaling industry in terms of the number of ships that departed. So annually, London would outperform every other port in England. Liverpool came second on quite a few occasions during the 1760s and 1770s. Of course, in some years, Hull and Whitby on the East Coast, they'd be key players as well. But the fact that Liverpool, a port that supposedly didn't have any whaling ties, certainly not in popular memory, that came second in England for some years, that is quite significant, I think. So, obviously, the tide goes in, to use the maritime pun, but of course, the time goes out as well. So 1776 was one of the high points of Liverpool's whaling industry, but 1823, that is the final year a ship leaves for Greenland from Liverpool. So it's very often regarded that was the end of Liverpool's whaling trade. And again, there's quite a few different reasons for this. As I said, when we think of Liverpool as a major maritime hub, we don't tend to think of whaling. Part of the reason for that is that Liverpool is involved in other trades. So in terms of the number of ships departing the port during the 18th century, most of them went around the British Isles. Okay, North Wales, London, Ireland, the Southwest, Scotland. And then, of course, you got business being transacted in Africa, the West Indies, North America, and of course, Europe too. So whaling was never really a major concern for Liverpool, but in its day, it was certainly an important trade. Another reason why it declined, the whaling trade, was the whaling bounty. By 1824, that's been scrapped by Westminster. Basically, what would happen was that you'd be paid a bounty, a sum of money, by the government and authorities. If you bring in this amount of whale blubber, you will be paid this amount of money. By 1824, that's been ripped up. Whale oil could also, or blubber come whale oil, that could be used for lubricating machinery. It could also be used for street lighting as well. But by the 1820s, there is an alternative to that, coal gas. And another reason why I think whaling goes out of fashion, as it were, in Liverpool during the early 19th century is the rise of trade to Asia. Prior to 1813, 1833, trade between Britain and China and India, that's monopolized by the East India Company, which is based in London, which means that places like Liverpool, Glasgow, Bristol, they don't really get a slice of the action, or certainly not directly anyway. But as I say, by the early 19th century, those restrictions, the monopoly of the East India Company has been removed, revoked, and as a result, traders in Liverpool are quite eager to take advantage of the China and the India market. And all this helps to account for the whaling trade declining in Liverpool. Briefly, I just want to say something about the southern whaling trade. I've spoken a lot about Greenland here so far. Was Liverpool involved in the southern whaling trade? Well, this is an interesting story. I recently published an article on this, which said that Liverpool made a very limited contribution to the southern whaling trade. I was using parliamentary papers, the UK parliamentary papers from this time, and they list the number of ships sailing out on the southern whale fishery. And Liverpool is very sporadic there. So I assume, naturally, that Liverpool made a very limited contribution. However, not long after I published my article, I got an email from Down Under saying that they had a database that looked at the number of logbooks for ships going down to the southern hunting grounds. And apparently quite a few ships departed Liverpool to go whaling in the Southern Ocean. So that's quite interesting. History is not always an exact science. You've got to be careful about your sample, the accuracy of your data. And I'm sure it's the same for conservationists as well. It's the same for us historians too. Now, very often, as I said, we think of 1823 as being the final year for Liverpool to be engaging in whaling. That was the last year a ship went to Greenland from Liverpool. But there's always a but. Every good story has a but here, and there's something else that we need to consider. Quite out of the blue, I was having a conversation with my mum, not so, a few years ago. She was telling me about my granddad. He served in the Merchant Navy during World War II, and after that, he became a docker down the Liverpool docks. And then, apparently, in the 1960s, late 60s or thereabouts, my granddad came home one night smelling of whale oil, or so the family was led to believe. That's quite a big shift, isn't it? The 1820s, we think that's the end of Liverpool's whaling trade. Now the 1960s, within living memory, that's a major shift there. So I must confess, this is what my current project is on, what I want to do more on. And any comments I have here are quite speculative at the moment because it is early days. I think part of the reason why Liverpool continues to have maybe not a whaling trade, but an association with whaling in the 20th century is by the association with Port Sunlight and Lever Brothers, who, of course, made soap. And, of course, whale oil could find its way into soap. And, of course, if any of you have been to the Wirral, you've probably been to Port Sunlight. You've seen the model village there for the workers that worked at Lever Brothers. There's an interesting story to be told here. And these ties between Lever and whaling seem to have been consolidated in 1919 when Lever bought the Southern Whaling and Sealing Company. No prizes for guessing what that business was involved in. And of course, by 1941, the Southern Whaling and Sealing Company was sold by Lever to Salveson, which of course was a major whaling business in its own right, a link, a Scottish-Norwegian partnership. So that is my my blurb done on the history of it, as it were. And now Yolanda is going to be telling us a little bit more about the science and biology and conservation of whales. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon. So, as we've seen, humans have hunted whales on a large scale for during the last couple of hundred years, and then on a smaller scale for thousands of years. And yet there are actually a lot of parallels between humans and whales, a lot of similarities. So, for example, we're both mammals, as Simon said, both found over a very wide range, many species, and we're both quite new in evolutionary terms. So, as Simon said, whales originated about 53 million years ago, which I know is quite a long time ago. But when you consider that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and sharks originated about 400 million years ago, cetaceans are actually quite recent, although not as recent as us, given that modern Homo sapiens, our species, have been around for a mere 160,000 years, so really just the blink of an eye. Another similarity is that humans and whales often have very complicated social structures. The species of some of the larger toothed whale species are very strongly structured and are often matrilineal, focused on mothers. For example, sperm whales live in a matrilineal society, meaning that most females spend their entire lives in the same social group and live with their mother while both are still alive. Female calves babysit and sometimes even suckle each other's young, and they'll defend themselves communally if attacked, for example, by orcas. The males, on the other hand, leave the group they were born into and form temporary groups with other young males in adolescence before growing more and more solitary with age. Female sperm whales and their young live in small units, and different units seem to have quite characteristic behaviour. For example, sperm whales have a coda, which is a series of distinct clicks. Adults in social groups have the same codas, and different codas define different sperm whale clans. So one of the key purposes of the codas is thought to be to label and to reinforce social bonds. However, it is important to note that not all toothed whales are matrilineal. So, for example, the northern bottlenose whale doesn't live in a matrilineal society. Instead, you get networks of females and then stronger relationships between pairs of males. Now, another similarity between humans and some whales, and one that I think is really interesting, is the menopause. Now, many large female mammals, such as elephants and chimpanzees, reduce their reproductive rate with age. But this is different to the menopause, which is where females routinely live for decades after they last give birth. It used to be thought that the menopause was unique to humans, but we now know that orcas, or killer whales, and short-finned pilot whales, both of which, confusingly, despite the name, are actually dolphins, also have the menopause. And it seems that some species of whales, such as the sperm whale, do as well. Now, the menopause has often been regarded as a bit of an evolutionary mystery, because on the face of it, it just doesn't seem to make sense. It would seem that females should continue reproducing, even if it might not be as effective, in order to try and pass their genes on to a few more offspring. One idea that has been suggested for why the menopause exists is that in hunter-gatherer societies, hardly any women lived past the age of 40. Hardly anyone lived past the age of 40, so it didn't actually matter what happened after them, because people wouldn't be alive to reproduce anyway. Now, this theory was a bit suspect from the start, given that there's quite a high number of elderly women in technologically simple societies without healthcare. And the presence of the menopause in cetaceans proved once and for all that the menopause is not a feature of modern medicine or technology. Instead, the grandmother hypothesis has been proposed. And this is the suggestion that an older female, instead of spending energy and effort and risk in reproducing herself, is better off not reproducing so that she's got effort and energy and is alive to help raise her existing children and grandchildren. And as the children and grandchildren have a lot of her genes, the older female is actually more likely to be able to pass on her genes by not reproducing, but instead by helping her descendants survive. And studying whales has actually helped to back up this theory, because the whale and dolphin societies that have the menopause are all matrilineal societies, meaning that the females in these societies, as in traditional hunter-gatherer societies, tend to become increasingly surrounded by close relatives as they get older. As with humans, hunter-gatherer and early farming societies, whales and dolphins live with the possibility of drastic, unpredictable changes to their environment. And so the information held by the elders can be crucial to surviving these changes. Another link or similarity between humans and whales is that whales have been observed displaying what seems to be altruism. So, for example, sperm whales have been observed risking their lives to rescue injured group members from attacking orcas. If one of their pod is injured and isolated, then sperm whales will often leave the safety of the group and go out and try and guide the injured whale back into the group. When under attack, sperm whales will also surround a vulnerable pod member, for example, a calf, with their tails thrust outward to ward off the attackers. Another species that's been known to display what seems to be altruism is the northern bottlenose whale. Although, unfortunately, in this case, altruism can sometimes work against this animal. So the northern bottlenose whale suffered greatly from whaling. And one of the reasons for this is that this species would tend to stay with injured companions. So if one of the whales got harpooned, others would stay with it, making them even more vulnerable to whaling. Now, amazingly, whales have even been known to show what looks like altruism towards other species. For example, a pack of orcas, they sometimes feed on this rather cute animal, seals. On one occasion, a pack of orcas was seen trying to wash the seal off a piece of floating ice and into the sea, which they managed to do. The seal swam towards a group of nearby humpback whales, and as the seal reached the closest humpback, the humpback rolled over onto its back, and the seal was swept up onto its chest between its massive flippers. As the orcas moved closer, the humpback arched its chest, lifting the seal out of the water, and when the seal started to slide off the humpback into the sea, the humpback used its flipper to nudge the seal back into the middle of its chest, and the seal was then able to get to the safety of another piece of ice. So an amazing example of not only altruism in whales, but altruism towards members of a different species altogether. Now, one of the key secrets to humans' success, or perhaps even the key reason, is our ability to learn from one another. And whales have this as well. For example, historic data from whalers' logbooks suggests that sperm whales in the North Pacific learned from each other how to fend off whalers' harpoons. And by looking at the records to see the rate at which the whalers caught the whales they sighted, they found a decline of nearly 60% over just a few years in the rate at which the whales that were spotted got caught. The reason for this is that before whaling, sperm whales' only predators were orcas. sperm whales defended themselves against orcas by crowding together at the surface of the water. Now, this worked well as a defense against orcas, but it made the sperm whales easy prey if they were being attacked by whalers because they could easily be harpooned. The whales quickly changed their tactic when being attacked by whaling vessels. And the whalers' observation suggests that the whales started escaping upwind, making it harder for the whaling ships to chase after them, or even attacking the whaling boats. Now, not only did the sperm whales get better at escaping the whalers, it seems that inexperienced family units, if connected to a family that had experience with whalers, learned from their more experienced group mates how to protect themselves. In another example of whales learning from each other, humpback whales in the Northwest Atlantic needed to find a new food source in the early 1980s after herring stocks crashed due to overfishing. The whales switched from hunting herring to hunting sandlance, and to catch the sandlance, they used a new hunting technique called lobtail feeding, which was hitting the water, the surface of the water, with their tails to herd the prey, and then diving while blowing bubbles to create bubble nets around their prey and trap them. Rather than each individual whale discovering this for themselves, they learned it from one another. In fact, whales have what could arguably be called culture, which is behaviour patterns shared by members of a community that rely on socially learned and transmitted behaviour. One of the clearest examples of this is the song of the humpback whale. The male humpback sings very loudly. It can be heard many kilometres away underwater. And the song is not random noises. Instead, humpback whales virtually all sing the same song, which is about 30 minutes long, but can be repeated over and over again for hours. Now, although almost all humpback whales are singing the same song as each other, the song changes over time and can change almost entirely in less than a year. Now, individual learning can't account for this. The whales haven't all spontaneously and individually decided to change their song, but to sing exactly the same one on their own. And evolution can't account for this either, given that the whale song has changed in much less time than the lifespan of a whale. The only explanation for it is culture. The whales are learning and copying behaviour from each other. So, shall we have a little listen to the song that was the whale song that was Christmas #1 among the humpbacks a few years ago? Quite a soothing sound, I think. And another similarity between humans and whales is that whales have been observed engaging in what seems to be play. For example, southern right whales have been seen raising their tail flukes at a right angle to the wind and using it as a sail to be blown along through the water. Now, this seems to be a form of play rather than serving any practical purpose, because the whale will often swim back to the place where it started from and do it again and again and again. However, there's still so much that we don't know about these animals. We're not even sure how many species of whale there are. When you think of some new species being discovered, you might think of some obscure species of ant in some desert somewhere. But actually, there are still new species of whale being found. For example, Der Rana-Yagala's beaked whale has never been seen alive, and it's only known from 7 dead whales that have stranded on remote tropical islands over the last 50 years. So much more still to be learned about these creatures. Now, despite their enormous size and intelligence, many whale species are under threat and have been for decades or even centuries. By the early 1900s, whaling had left many whale species on the verge of extinction. There were attempts to regulate whaling, and in 1946, the International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling was founded, with the International Whaling Commission, or the IWC, as its decision-making body. The IWC was effective from 1948. It initially had 15 whaling nations and now has membership of 88 countries. Restrictions were set, including a ban on killing right whales, humpback whales, and grey whales. And quotas were also set for the number of whales that could be killed. However, despite the good intentions behind this, the quota actually encouraged a period of very intensive whaling, as whalers tried to reach their quotas within a smaller time frame. Quotas were also sometimes exceeded or not set at all, and some countries left the IWC. By about 1970, many species of whale were severely depleted. Commercial hunting of whales was finally banned worldwide by the IWC in 1986. Now, some species, for example, the humpback whale, have made an impressive recovery. In the 1950s, there were only about 450 humpback whales left, and today there are about 25,000. Other species populations remain stubbornly low. So, for example, the North Atlantic right whale has got a very, very long history of being hunted. It's actually called the right whale because it was considered to be the right whale to hunt, due to it being quite easy to approach and floating when killed. The North Atlantic right whale has been protected from whaling since 1935, and yet they're still classed as critically endangered, with about 350 left. Now, in some ways, whales' unusual biology actually works against them and makes it harder for a depleted population to recover, because whales tend to have a very long lifespan, and they also reproduce quite late in life. So, for example, with sperm whales, the female doesn't reach maturity until she's about 9 years old, and the male can't reproduce until he's about 18 years old. Each pregnancy lasts for about 15 months, and one calf is born roughly every 5 to 7 years. So even if the threats are removed, whale populations can't bounce back in the way that a population of something like hamsters could. Furthermore, a lot of threats to whales are still very much present, and one of these threats is actually still whaling. Whaling's often thought of as being a thing of the past. But actually, over 1,000 whales are hunted for commercial purposes every year, with Japan, Norway, and Iceland continuing to hunt whales. Japan carried on hunting whales, supposedly for scientific research, even after the ban in 1986. In this photo, we've got an adult and an adolescent minke whale being dragged aboard a whaling vessel. And if you look closely, you can see that on this boat, it says it's a legal research vessel. This photo was actually taken as part of a surveillance effort to collect evidence of indiscriminate harvesting, which is counter to Japan's claim that whales are being collected for scientific research. And then in 2018, Japan withdrew from the IWC altogether and now hunts for whales for what it freely admits are for commercial purposes. In Norway, the minke whale is hunted, and Iceland also hunts whales, although it does look hopeful that this might soon end in Iceland. Even when whales are not intentionally being caught, they can still be harmed by fishing. It's thought that accidental entanglement in fishing equipment and nets kills 300,000 cetaceans each year, where they're caught as bycatch. And bycatch is thought to be the biggest cause of harm and death to whales and dolphins today. So because cetaceans breathe air, becoming tangled up in fishing nets can cause them to drown. For those that escape, they can be left with injuries or with some fishing gear still wrapped around them and cutting into them, preventing them from hunting properly or causing infections. And also carrying nets around with them means that whales spend a huge amount of energy on this. So, for example, if you imagine that you had to drag a bag of sand around you wherever you went, it would slow you down and it would wear you out. And other animals are also susceptible to being caught as bycatch, for example, this turtle. Animals, including cetaceans, can also get tangled up in abandoned fishing gear called ghost gear, which can continue catching animals for many decades, especially as a lot of it is made of plastic. Entanglement in fishing gear is one of the key reasons why this lovely animal, the Chinese river dolphin, went extinct about 20 years ago. It's also driving the vaquita, which is a critically endangered porpoise that lives in the Gulf of Mexico. The vaquita is being driven to extinction through being caught and drowned in gill nets used in illegal fishing operations that take place within marine protected areas. So the numbers of vaquita are plummeting, and there's currently about 10 individuals left. They're the world's most endangered cetacean. As well as ghost gear, other types of plastic pollution have a massive impact on marine life. Estimates vary, but it's thought that about 12 million tonnes of plastic enter the ocean every year. And it's thought that about 400 million tonnes of plastic is produced every year. So to put that in perspective, 400 million tonnes is more than the weight of every single human on the planet combined. And that's the amount of plastic that we produce in a year. And half of it is thought to be single use. So used once and then thrown away. The two main problems with plastic in the oceans is animals getting tangled up in it and animals accidentally eating it. So whales and other marine life like this seal can become tangled up in plastic, making it harder for them to swim and catch food and even causing them to drown. And animals can also eat the plastic, mistaking it for food. For example, in 2018, a sperm whale was washed up dead on a beach in Spain. An autopsy was performed, and it was found that the whale had 29 kilograms of plastic in its stomach, which had caused a blockage in its digestive tract and led to its death. So if you look at the picture of the plastic bag, you can probably imagine that if you're a hungry sperm whale swimming around in the deep ocean, a plastic bag can actually look quite similar to a tasty squid. Other threats to whales include ship strikes. Many of the busiest shipping and ferry lanes go through areas where whales live or migrate or raise their young. And shipping traffic has hugely increased recently. and continues to increase at a rate of 2 to 3% per year. When ships travel too quickly, whales are unable to get out of their path in time, so are often hit by ships, causing injury or death. Noise pollution, for example from ships' engines, is another threat to whales, especially as noise travels for very long distances underwater. Noise pollution makes it much harder for whales to hear each other and can also interfere with whale navigation, causing them to become disorientated or separated from the rest of the group. To escape the noise, whales may also leave the best feeding grounds or the safest areas, putting themselves at further risk. Shipping noise can also cause whales to become very stressed, which in turn has impacts on their growth and their immune system. Whales can also be harmed by oil spills. Now, when you think of animals harmed by oil spills, people often think of furry animals like seal pups or otherwise seabirds, and the effect of oil spills on these animals are devastating. But actually, oil spills also have an impact on whales. For example, whales can be harmed by them by eating prey that's been contaminated, or by accidentally eating oil as they swim through the oil spill, or by breathing in the fumes. And climate change will also affect whales, for example, by affecting the distribution of their food and affecting their migration patterns. So, what's the importance of whales, and what's the impact of declining whale populations? Well, whales actually play a key role in ocean ecosystems, including being important for healthy fisheries, as whales fertilise the oceans. As some of the longest migrating animals on the planet, whales spread nutrients across the oceans thanks to their whale poo. This moves nutrients for thousands of miles, increasing marine productivity in areas that would otherwise be much less productive. And these nutrients create productive marine ecosystems and support entire marine food webs, including fisheries. These nutrients also support phytoplankton, microscopic algae. Now, phytoplankton are the foundation of the ocean's food web. Phytoplankton also play a major role in balancing the gases in the atmosphere through photosynthesis. So, through photosynthesis, phytoplankton absorb carbon dioxide and release oxygen. It's estimated that phytoplankton absorb nearly a third of all human-generated carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is a similar amount to that absorbed by all land-based ecosystems, including rainforests and forests. So phytoplankton and the whales that enable the phytoplankton to grow are absolutely crucial in the fight against climate change. And phytoplankton also produce oxygen through photosynthesis. So it's estimated that phytoplankton produces half of the planet's oxygen. So every other breath we take is thanks to phytoplankton. So whales play an absolutely crucial role in marine ecosystems. And whales actually store huge amounts of carbon themselves. Carbon accumulates and is stored in a whale's body during its lifetime. It's estimated that each great whale stores an average of 33 tonnes of carbon. In comparison, a tree, which is also a great way of capturing carbon, can absorb about 1 tonne of carbon over a lifetime of 100 years. Also, whereas most land plants and animals release carbon back into the atmosphere after death, when a whale dies, it takes the carbon down to the seafloor with it. So the carbon is captured and stored at the bottom of the ocean for thousands of years, again, helping with climate change. And of course, these whales are incredible animals in themselves. We've got the largest animal ever to have lived, the blue whale, which can grow to over 30 metres, or the length of 3 double-decker buses. We've got one of the longest lived whales, the bowhead whale, which can live to more than 250 years, one of the longest lived animals. We've got the incredibly deep diving Cuvier's beaked whale, which can dive to 3 kilometres and hold its breath for an impressive 3 hours, 42 minutes. And whales are incredibly intelligent animals with their ability to communicate and to work as a team. The largest brain on the planet actually belongs to the sperm whale, which has a brain that weighs 9 kilograms, 6 times more than a human brain. And this is very subjective, but whales are arguably among the most beautiful creatures on Earth. So what can we do to help protect these amazing animals? One of the ways we can help to protect whales and other marine life is to only buy fish that has a low environmental impact. For example, pole and line caught fish, as this is where fish are caught using a hand line, and this fishing method has got a low impact on non-target species. So there's much less bycatch. You could also take part in a beach clean. The Bay programme runs frequent beach cleans, and there's one at Morecambe on the 20th of July from 6 till 8 in the evening. One at North Whalley on the 28th of July from 12 till 2, where we'll also be using an app called Fish and Click to record ghost gear, abandoned fishing gear. And then there's another beach clean at Fleetwood on the 29th of July, 10:30 till 12. And details are on the website. There are various other beach cleans run by other organisations such as the Marine Conservation Society and the National Trust. And of course, anytime you're on the beach, you can pick up litter and use the Ghost Gear app to record abandoned fishing gear. One of the most important things we can do to help protect whales and other marine life is to reduce the amount of plastic we use. For example, by buying food with less plastic packaging and reusing plastic when we do use it, for example, by using a water bottle more than once, and also recycling plastics. This all helps to reduce the amount of plastic that ends up in the sea. And avoiding microplastics such as glitter also helps marine life. So these are some of the simple steps that we can do every day to help play a part in protecting these amazing creatures. So thank you for listening, and we're now going to take questions. You could either put up your hand using the Put Up Your Hand app, or you could put your question in the chat.
Erin, is that your hand up?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting talk, both of you. And I learned a lot. There's a lot of information there I didn't know. I would like to say, though, that although the theory of evolution is believed by the majority of people, it hasn't ever been proved. And in contrast to that, there is abounding evidence everywhere in the earth that fits perfectly with the biblical account, and that is what I believe.
Well, different people have different views, but I think one thing we can all agree on is that these animals are amazing. They play a key role. And in a way, you know, personally, I believe in evolution, but I think in a way, is it so important how they got here? I think the important thing is how are we going to keep them here, and to focus on working out what we can do to help protect these amazing animals.
Yeah. Yes, it is very important, but also speaking as a Christian, that it's a responsibility not only to the animals, but also to God, because he is their maker. And so we will eventually be answerable to him. But I agree with you, they are beautiful and amazing animals, and something I'd like to learn a lot more about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sally.
Yolanda, I've got one question, but I've got a couple of questions from chat if you want me to read those out. From Jack E. Is the target of 30% of protected marine areas factoring in whale breeding and migration areas?
Oh, that's a good question.
Sorry, I didn't quite follow that question. I didn't quite understand it.
So there's... Sorry, go on.
Sorry. Yeah, if you wanted me just to say that again, Sharon, the question is asking whether the key breeding and migration areas are factored into the areas that have been protected under marine protection areas.
Oh,
I would imagine that they would be.
Yes, I didn't look up the specifics of that, but it has been carefully considered. So I expect it has been. The difficulty with something like the humpback whale, which migrates, you know, from the equator to the poles, is it's never going to stay within a protected area. But the 30% target, you know, will make a huge difference, and it will help enormously. And it will also help with regards to making or helping to make sure that the food sources for the whales are able to survive.
We've got another question here, Yolanda, from Con Elphinstone, saying, when a whale dies and sinks to the bottom of the ocean, you said the carbon remains there. As the whale disintegrates, why is the carbon not released?
So my understanding is that the whale breaks down slowly and the carbon's released, but stays at the bottom of the ocean rather than coming back into the atmosphere. So it's sunk down to the bottom of the ocean, and it stores it for much longer than if something died on the land and the carbon was released quickly back into the atmosphere.
Okay, thank you. And we've got one from Stephen Ali Bug here. Aren't there any organisations campaigning for the worldwide protection of whales to stop illegal whale hunting, to stop fishing in harmful ways, to stop people leaving ghost nets and prevent bycatch?
There's about 100 different organisations, yes. So a lot of the information I got for this talk was from various different charities and organisations. Orca is a whale and dolphin charity. WWF as well have done various campaigns. There's a lot of different campaigns to reduce plastic in the oceans. So there's a lot of different campaigns. Is partly the challenge of actually getting the laws, first of all, to be made, and then also getting the laws to be enforced. So, for example, going back to the example of the vaquita, it's being hounded to extinction within marine protected areas. So it's getting the laws made, and it's also getting the laws to be enforced as well.
Are you generally, this is a sort of segue from that question from me, Yolanda, are you generally optimistic? Do you think we're doing better than we were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even though there's still a heck lot to be done?
I mean, the fact that now, as much as I wish the countries weren't whaling, the fact that it's now 3 countries that do whaling, rather than all the many countries it used to be, is a huge improvement. And many whale species, their numbers are increasing. It's quite hard to feel optimistic about something like the vaquita, for example, when it's down to 10 individuals. But I do think more and more people are aware of conservation, and taking more action, and people are generally more aware. On the other hand, with things like plastic, which I do have a lot of in my house, and it's just very difficult to avoid it. It's once it's in the sea, it's very difficult to get it out of the sea, really. I'm cautiously optimistic on many species.
Okay, that's good. I've got a couple more questions. Do we have time here from the chat? From Peter J. Lees, says, correct me if I am wrong, but there are lots of shallow mudflats in Morecambe Bay, so beaching must be a risk for whales. Despite that, there are sightings of whales and dolphins in Morecambe Bay area. If so, where are the hotspots?
It's been a few sightings. There's a minke whale seen not that long ago, and that actually lives around the coast. And then sighting of dolphins as well. The Isle of Man, I've heard, is a good spot. And also up around Scotland, there's actually a resident pod of orcas that live around there, and various other species. And then around Wales as well, you get bottlenose dolphins. The best place sort of within Europe is the Bay of Biscay. So between just off the coast of France and Spain. And it's actually the 5th best place in the world to see whales and dolphins if you were going to go a little bit further afield.
Marvellous. We've got a question here from Alison. I read on the news today that more whales are beaching as their food disappears. What can we do to help with this problem?
Well, there's various different sources, different reasons why food sources might be disappearing. So part of it could be overfishing. So it can be quite difficult to know which fish is actually sustainably caught. And just because something says it's sustainably caught doesn't mean it necessarily is. But trying to research which fish is sustainably caught before you buy it can be helpful, to make sure you're not buying from overfished stocks, or even worse, something that catches whales and dolphins and other animals when it's trying to catch fish. Climate change can be a factor as well, so trying to reduce your carbon footprint. And then actually plastic pollution can cause whales to starve, because if they're mistaking plastic for food, they'll be eating the plastic and then they'll have a stomach full of plastic, which can lead to digestive, like blocks in the digestive tract. It can mean they don't actually feel hungry, so they can starve in that way. So the main ones would be trying to buy sustainably caught fish and also reducing the amount of plastic you use.
That's a nice segue, actually, if we still have time. A question from David Hayden. Is there any answer to the problem of ghost gear? You mentioned lines and poles, but that would only alleviate the problem. Should we perhaps eat less fish?
So eating less fish is one answer. On the other hand, there's the growing population and the challenge of how to feed people. And also particularly for people in poorer countries, fish can be a really important food source, and particularly of protein. Eating less fish is one solution. there is a global ghost gear initiative to try and reduce the amount of ghost gear in the oceans as well.
I've seen that off Cornwall, actually. It's quite active down there, not particularly just cetacean specific, but sort of ghost gear hunting missions. And actually fishing boats are actually reporting when they lose gear now, so that people can go out and retrieve it, because a lot of the net loss is actually accidental.
Yeah. The Fish and Click app is useful as well. So I never realised how much ghost gear there actually was just on the beaches around Walney until I started using it.
Yeah.
But it's a good way of encouraging people to pick up the ghost gear and also helping to map the problem.
Now, Sarah Neal actually says here, which Alison had asked about whales off the northeast of England, and this might actually be helpful in a way. Sarah Neal says, if you want to follow sightings of cetaceans in Cumbria, then follow Cumbria Whale and Dolphin Watch. I don't know if that's on Facebook.
Oh, yeah. That's all I do.
And then Alison would like to know, for the northeast of England, she knows there's minke whales, but what other types of whales might she see?
Oh, I don't know that you'd see other types of whale there apart from the minke whale, because it's very shallow. I think you get common dolphins there, and you get a lot of seals as well, which obviously are not cetaceans, but still.
Yeah, still worth a
quite
look.
adorable.
Well, Sarah's just confirmed that page is in fact on Facebook, and Peter's just said again, Peter Lees, he was wondering specifically about Morecambe Bay sightings of whales and dolphins. If anyone is interested, follow Manx Whale and Dolphin site, Dolphin Watch on Facebook, lots of sightings. So there seems to be quite a lot to go out there on Facebook as well, Yolanda.
Brilliant.
Yeah. Could I ask one question? Do we have time before we go?
Yeah, I'll do my best.
I didn't quite hear the humpback tune. It didn't transmit to there. But when you were saying, like, over the course of a year, the song can change, are you saying that's a global phenomenon or a kind of pod phenomenon?
No, a global one.
Wow.
So it can spread across the oceans. So they must be listening to each other's songs, and kind of like fashion, really.
Yeah.
And copying each other.
Wow, maybe we should listen to them a little more, perhaps.
Well, yeah.
You know.
I find it very soothing, the song of the humpback whale.
Well, thank you. So we've come to the end of the questions in the chat, which is probably quite timely. So I'll hand back over to you and mute myself.
So thank you all for coming along. I hope you enjoyed the talk. Thank you especially to Simon. I learned a lot about the history of whaling. So thank you for coming, and hopefully see you on another event.